Hi guys, welcome to week 3, and in week 3 we're going to discuss one of my favorite of all time types of debates, and those are debates about extreme individual liberty versus protection against harm from that liberty, or a recognition that community maybe, or the environment or government should take some precedence, right? I think this is my favorite type of debate because it gives me the opportunity to make some crazy libertarian arguments. And that's what I think a lot of debates are about. In fact, I think maybe that's why people kind of, developed the art of debating, because they wanted to shine on the individual stage or level, or make these kind of crazy arguments about why individuals deserve some extreme fundamental, super individual rights, in the face of community and government, and, like the right to harm yourself, or the right to do crazy individual things and to separate yourself from the rest of society. Because that's, I think, a part of how we as societies evolve. We understand that communities and societies and governments and stuff are important. People are not alone. No man is an island, to carry on the metaphor thing from last week. But part of that society and community within that also exists a tension, right? The tension of the individual who wants to be different from society, but recognize that he or she is connected to society. Okay, and if you, like me, come from more communal, societies where people try to kind of share everything and have these quote-unquote Asian values, then you will know a lot of what I'm talking about and maybe share my passion for these types of debates. But let me not talk too much about myself, which I tend to do, and let's talk about the motion. Okay, so liberty. I'll give you an overview of what I think these debates are about, right? So it's about the spectrum of individual rights. Okay, of individual rights or freedoms versus the harms of individuals, of harms of these rights, or harms individuals can do to themselves. Okay, I know that's not grammatically correct, but this is about ideas, right? Don't worry about the exact prose. So the harms that individuals can cause to themselves, and the role of the state in preventing that. Okay, so I think that's largely what this debate is about. Okay, and I'm gonna flesh out this spectrum a little bit. So on this side, you have the massive amount of individual rights, right? So if you think about the things that individuals can do to themselves, even if it's harmful to themselves, okay? And on this side, you have suicide, okay, the right to kill yourself. You have euthanasia, which is like suicide, but it's very conditional, right? And on very specific conditions, you have the right to kill yourself, suicide or assisted suicide, rather, right? That's a little bit more extreme, more open. What else? The right to amputate yourself or have someone amputate you. One of the motions we'll discuss, the right to participate in duels, right? So all of these things are things which seem really extreme because it could lead to incredible amounts of harm. We don't know whether it doesn't seem rational from a rational perspective. And I'm going to say rational here, like this with inverted quotes, because what is rational, people try to objectively understand what is rational. And in order to do that, you say what most people consider to be rational, right? So what's rational is what is beneficial, isn't it? Because if I make more money, if I live longer, if I'm healthier, it's beneficial from what society decides, or society agrees, let's say, are good things. They're what most people in society want, and beneficial from a survival perspective, from an evolutionary perspective. It makes sense that all those things are rational. But sometimes people want to do things that are anti-evolutionary, like live shorter lives, right? Because it gives them more enjoyment. It gives them more fulfillment, more happiness, okay? even if those things are not rational. So, for example, smoking is incredibly irrational. It'll give you cancer and you will die. Some extreme sports are very, very irrational because it leads to harms and you can die, right? But yet people want to engage in this risque behavior because they feel fulfilled. They feel happy. They feel driven. They feel alive when they do things that might kill themselves. Now, it seems ironic, a little hypocritical, but if it makes sense to individuals, then maybe we should let those individuals do these things. And largely in society, we do. We let people smoke and drink and drive really fast cars, and we don't make people procreate and to live happy families. You're right. Although most governments and societies tend to regard that as positive behavior and has legislation to support it, it's not something we force people to do or judge people who don't do it. Yeah, we do in some, societies that I come from especially. But generally, my point here is that there is a wide understanding of what is regarded as rational, right? And even if you see something that you think is not rational, we still allow people to do it because it leads to their happiness, to their fulfillment, to their self-actualization. And why is this such a big deal? What is this self-actualization thing? It's you being able to discover yourself. So it comes from an idea that there isn't a one type or one role of person. This is very non-Confucian, there are these 5 roles in society and you have to fit into them. They're about discovering what exactly your role is, who exactly is the person that you want to be, and doing things that make you happy, make you more fulfilled is your purpose on earth. And therefore, governments and societies should not only allow you to do these things, they should make it possible for you to do these things, right? That's why in debates about education, for example, you can argue that education is a tool that leads to your self-actualization, because a process of education allows me more options, allows me to discover what I want to do, allows me to be happy, right? And that's great because it allows me to be happy, and that's fantastic. That's what government should do. But happier individuals who are doing things that they like to do, one will assume will do those things better and therefore also benefit everybody else. Okay? And so we'll all live happily ever after, right? So that's generally the idea, and most people think that's fantastic and lead towards trying to give individuals more and more rights. Okay? There's another more there. But the question is then, what is the balance? Where do we stop? No one wants to live over here where there is no individuality, right? We're all just robots. Okay, that's extreme. But you can also have, countries where there is no freedom of speech, right? There is no freedom of association or movement, right? There's no recognition of minority or different cultures, where ideas are very uniform, ideologies are very uniform, there's no differences, there's no space for individuality, there's only space for conformity. Okay, so that is on this side of the spectrum. And you can see in some countries like, North Korea, where there is one ideology, and not just a political ideology, but also a cultural ideology, a vision and a representation of individuals, and it's very difficult to find individuality. Okay, so no one wants to be on this side of the extreme, but people aren't also always comfortable about this side of the extreme. Right? So a lot of societies exist in the middle, in the balance. That was a really poor color to choose. We'll do this one, even though it overlaps. Okay, and these debates are about a movement usually from here in the middle, right, to more and more liberty, with maybe choosing one or two the extreme things or examples and defending them, right? So picking something. So for example, picking physician-assisted suicide and defending, assisted suicide in view of where we are right now in the middle. And on that side, and the side that supports, say, this physician-assisted or assisted suicide, right, or a right of individuals to amputate themselves, the right of individuals to kill themselves, the right of individuals to change into something else, right, the right of individuals to sell themselves into slavery, the right of individuals to do all kinds of crazy things to individuals, usually, right, in view of whether or not we should protect individuals from doing these things, okay? And that's pretty much this debate, in a nutshell. So I'll get into a little bit of an overview of the debate specifically, and then we'll discuss some common arguments and approaches. Okay, so this is the general view. The approach on the government side is the individual is king. I'm going to go with red. The individual is king, right? You thrive on the rights of the individual. You believe that the individual, the human, the man, the woman, is what life is all about, and that person is and should be the master of their destiny, right? Government only gets in the way. Society gets in the way. They hold you back. They tax you. They put rules against you. They tell you how to conform. They do all these different things that limit and strip away your individuality, which is the essence of your life. Now, you're not saying everybody must be different. You're saying people must choose. So, as a libertarian on this side, if people want to conform, you'd allow them to conform. And that's an interesting kind of libertarian twist, right? So if individuals want to do bad things to themselves that come from old societal practices, for example, and this is the argument people use to defend, for example, women who choose to perform surgeries on their hymens, or women who choose to get into what seems like repressive religious attire, or take on repressive religious or pseudo-religious rituals like genital mutilation, or men or people who want to do these things. There is a way to kind of flip it. Of course, it gets very gray, right? So if I choose to do something ritualistic to myself that's really painful, am I doing it because it's my individual choice to do it? Or am I doing it because I'm trying to conform? And if I'm trying to conform, is it okay for me to try to conform? If that is what is my individual choice. But is it really my individual choice? Because I've been born into this culture which I didn't choose. I'm surrounded by this culture which I didn't choose in this history. And that's kind of drawing me in. So I don't actually have the choice to be free. Right? So what's very interesting in these debates will be a discussion of what exactly choice means. And how do you determine free choice, right? How do you measure free choice? Because you can never make choice in a vacuum, in absence of all the other things that you've experienced. You can discuss choice and consequences, right? Choice and benefits, so the choice of doing these things, or the choices of not doing these things, right? So if I chose to do this very painful, strange ritual that makes me closer to my community, that's my choice. But what is my choice of not doing that? If my choice of not doing that means I'm estranged and separated from my community, then that makes it less likely that this is a free choice, right? Because I'm doing it in order to belong to my community, because otherwise I'll be separated. So it isn't that I'm choosing to avoid separation, not really choosing to find my own self, right? So that's interesting. And you can also ask questions, so why is that a bad thing for people to do, and so on and so forth. But I'm just trying to point out that we'll have some interesting discussions about choice, or you will end up walking down paths you cannot unwalk anymore, which is a fantastic thing about these types of debates. Okay, so the approach in Gov, all about the individual, all about fantastic, free, unfettered, unbridled individual choice. On opposition, it's a recognition of society, one, right? We all stand on the shoulders of others. We need to respect and recognize that we belong in a community. And that community is really, really powerful. And we shouldn't do things that will push us and separate us from community. But here also we talk about harm to self. And the role of this community and the role of this government is to prevent harm. And we talk about how these choices can be really extreme, and these choices can't be undone, right? You can't undo these choices. And therefore makes it really, really dangerous. So if you regret the choice, you can't turn it back. And to some extent, all choices can't be fully undone, right? You spend half an hour watching this video, and at the end you regret the worst half an hour of your life. You can never get it back, right? But you still have full autonomy and freedom, and you can do many, many different things. Versus if you cut off your hand and throw it away, and then later you regretted cutting off your hand, there's very little things you could do to get your hand back. You could get like a kind of bionic hand, but it will, never really be the same hand that you knew and loved. Contrast this with euthanasia, suicide. Those choices are irreversible, right? So that's one way to measure the validity of a choice. The choice can be free and not harm anybody else, but because the choice is not reversible, maybe the standard of freedom of that choice or rationality or the understanding of you making the choice needs to be much higher. At least that's the argument you will make from neg, okay? Or the approach that you take from neg. Some specific arguments on Gov, you talk about the freedom from oppression of society, right? How individuals exist within the sphere and fear, and they want and they need to be free. And that's why we must always prioritize and recognize individual rights. And this oppression isn't just oppression of laws, it's oppressions of ideas and norms, right? So like with homosexual rights, transsexual rights, the discussions, notions of gender or race, there is conformity, and you want to recognize individuals being able to break away and get freedom from that conformity. We'll also argue that it leads to more productivity, more happiness, more individual freedoms, but also happier societies, right? More functioning societies, rather ones where individuals are forced to conform, forced to do what other people want them to do. The neg is going to say this is only going to benefit some people, going to harm others. It could lead to exploitation. You need to show that it will help everyone. It will help the people who have the most, it will help the people who have the least, right? And you can try to flip things around, right? You can accuse the other side of being very condescending, of saying, poor people don't know how to decide, or, this type of person is only going to make bad decisions. That's terrible. We're going to trust anybody, people who don't know anything to do anything to themselves. Maybe not. You want to set some standards, talk about what most likely will not happen, but you want to show how everyone can benefit, not just some people, okay? On the other side, you talk about how freedom is good, but it must be balanced. It must be balanced against the interests of society and balanced against the interests of of the individual, because too much freedom can be harmful and make people do bad things, which is why we don't let children drink, assuming that they have limited compromised rationality, right? Which is why we don't let we don't let people we think is unbalanced do adventure sports, which is why we have many regulations. Even in countries that legalize euthanasia, you need to show that you're mentally competent. You need to have a few different doctors evaluate your claim. You need to do all of these things first before we decide you can do something, right? And you can argue that when things are so extreme and so crazy, many other things are going to get in the way. So there's going to be like passion that will cloud your judgment. There may be anger. There may be all these other things that will make it much less likely that you are making a rational decision with a view of the consequences. Okay? And that will be a problem. What you can also argue here is that some kind of limitation, some kind of government connection is positive because it helps you self-actualize, right? People don't like living in welfare states, or at least libertarians don't. But many people in welfare states are in a way freer than people who are not. Yeah, you have to pay taxes, but because you have these taxes, you have safety nets, you are freer to change your job and pursue passions because you're not dependent on your job for health insurance, right, which makes you tied to one source of employment. You can afford to be laid off. You can afford to get sick because you can go to a hospital. And those things translate to freedom, right? I'm free to study different things without worrying about the student debt that is accumulating. It's going to crush me. So in a way, having more ties to government, having government provide more things to you, frees you in a sense, right? And on off, you're going to talk about the majority of the people who benefit from this, okay? Because you're going to say these ultimate freedoms only benefits very certain select groups of people. The people who don't want to pay tax tend to be the people who have a ton of money, okay? And because they can afford to buy everything and anything, and they don't need government assistance. And these are the people who like to talk about how they did it on their own without anybody's help. They built their own fortunes. Yes, my father's connections and name helped a little bit. And yeah, that startup funding was kind of useful. And yes, all this wonderful, amazing infrastructure that other people built kind of played a part, but it was also my ingenuity and my creativity and my risk-taking ability, which is all true. The amazing things that you did would not be possible without your intellect and your genius and your charisma and all those things. Definitely, those things are yours. No one can take them away. But it's also true that it wouldn't have been possible without these other things that you had no part in creating, right? And so on Gov or Op here, you argue we need to have a little bit of balance. And not just think about those who have everything. And even those who have everything, part of their everything is connected to all of us. Okay? So that's the basic kind of split. The major clashes or clash points in debate, I think, will be about balance. How to exactly strike the balance, right? Between idealism and practicality. The NAG will say the Gov wants anarchy. The Gov will say the NAG wants, a welfare state or communism. Welfare states aren't actually that bad. Where is the line in the middle? How do we draw this? Okay. I think it will also, in terms of trying to show who's helping more or other people, you try to be quantitative. You're going to talk about who helps more people and how. Okay. So are we only helping select few individuals that benefit? Or are we helping everyone, right? And which is a better approach? And of those select few that benefit, are they really benefiting or are they being harmed, right? There'll also be a clash around choice. Is this really free choice? Is this a type of choice that we should give individuals, not give individuals? Where's the line? Where do we draw it? I think what's interesting to do on Gov, especially if you're proposing kind of, radical things, is to show how there may be precedence in society, right? Choose other things that society already allows and legalizes and extend the principle from those things, right? So you say that because we allow euthanasia and there's a similarity between euthanasia and this situation, therefore we should allow this situation. Because we are already allowed this, and this, we should therefore allow this. And that will allow you to seem less controversial and will make this seem like a progression. It will also show how people can benefit, how people are used to this sort of freedom, right? And if you have some of these examples, you can extend from them the checks that are in place, the checks and balances that are in place, right? So the tricky thing is you shouldn't over-regulate these choices because as a libertarian, you don't want too many regulations, but you can show that in societies, we've given people this freedom and they've managed to use it responsibly. And because there are some of these checks and the checks of education, the checks of minor regulations, small things that we can put in place and we can extend that, right? So just like we do with euthanasia, just like we do with, guns in these X and Y, Z states, just like we do here and here and here and here, we can allow these things and therefore it will be fine, right? On NAG, you will say that, no, these things are different, that there are essential differences, right? In principle, again, right? So usually in terms of the harm that's involved, in terms of the options that these individuals have, right? That's why we allow some of these things because there are no options. In this other situation, there are many options. For example, what are the long-term unintended consequences and so on and so forth, okay? So that's generally the type of balance. Okay. Let's look at a few more motions. I don't know why I used that sing-song voice. I apologize for the sing-song voice. Not my strong suit. Okay, we're going to look at 3 motions. Let's get to it, right? The first one. Assuming it was possible, this house would allow people to sell years of their life to others. Generally not a fan of these assuming things are possible things, because you shouldn't assume too much. Assumptions, assume is how you make an ass of you and me. But I think that the question at the heart of this is interesting, right? Would you allow people to sell years of their life to other people? Okay, so this will bring back questions or memories of things like slavery. And in a sense, it is. If you sell years of your life, you're giving away a part of your life to them. And if it's in years, I suppose you can't take it back until the end of those years, right? So in that sense, it's going to be a hard thing to buy. So the first thing I'm going to try to do from Gav in this debate is think about things that we already do in society that are similar to this, right? So like jobs and contracts. So when you contract yourself to a company, you sign this contract, you have to follow those terms. You say you work for them until this amount of time, this amount of place, and you will do these X things, and if you don't do something, they will fire you, right? That's giving your time. In some other situations, it can be a little bit more extreme. If I was an athlete, for example, if I'm a soccer player, football player or something, I'm contracted for a few years with a certain club. And if I don't like it, it's up to the club whether they want to sell it or not sell me, or to cancel my contract, right? If they don't want to cancel my contract or sell me, I will have to stay at that club. I don't really have a choice because that's my contract. I do have some checks and balances. I can take it to court and so on and so forth, but I'm still contracted there to that club. They own me, right? So I think you can use these things to set up a kind of precedence to show that the idea in itself isn't very strange, right? That said, you can't propose things that people are already doing all the time, okay? So given this though, I think take a step further and say, we're going to let individuals just sell them, to another individual, to do whatever they want, okay? If you put in some checks, and this is where you put in the checks. So the checks can't be overall state intervention. If your checks are that the state is going to monitor and step in every day and take the person's temperature and make sure that, then, it's the state controlling everything. Then you're not really being full-on individual, can do whatever they want to themselves. You're saying individuals can do whatever states will let them do and monitor and check. So that isn't. But you can set regulations that ensure that the individual one has full information, okay, as much as possible, and so that the individual can decide, right? 2, we can say checks to make sure that the individual is rational, fully understands what he or she is going into. This is part of that in terms of getting the information, but also just the individual is aware, right? And sometimes what helps with this is time. So this can't be a spontaneous, immediate kind of decision. Individuals must take like a few weeks, 2 weeks, a month or something like that to think about it, and then they can, if at the end of that time they still want to do it, then they can do it, right? The tricky thing is when opt-outs. So if the individual or others can show that the contract has been breached, right, then the individual can opt out of this, obviously, because there is a contract, right? But we're going to say that we're going to allow contracts that are pretty comprehensive, right? So pretty much that I will be able to kind of sell myself into indentured slavery or something for a limited period of time, and then after which I'm going to be free, right? Because it says years of my life. Unless I also want to sell my entire life, will that be possible? On Gav, if you really want to be extreme and support full libertarian principles, you should say that it should be possible. If you've really thought about it, as much as one can possibly think about it, although it's really difficult to think about your entire life in a view, then do it. talk about situations where it may be possible, right? So if I've sold a few years of my life and then I kind of like it and then I'm going to decide I'm going to sell it full on, then maybe that individual should be allowed to do it. Okay? So that's the kind of tone, the way I'm going to approach the debate from Gulf. So still pretty, extreme, right? And I'm going to talk about, obviously, running in terms of arguments, the individual rights. Right? That has to be first and foremost. And run some of the ideas that we discussed earlier. That's what it means to self-actualize, right? To find out who you are and so on and so forth. Go back to the precedences and say how these things really exists, etc., etc. How we're doing it in much softer ways and how we can do it in a more full and open way. Okay. The second thing I'll talk about is the benefits. Now, while this policy may seem extreme, and in some senses, I guess it is a little extreme, you can argue that there is clarity involved, right? So if I sign some kind of slave contract in a construction site or work in a sweatshop or something, that's not ideal, but that happens. And if I can do this and, kind of get a sell-off, right, and in a full chunk, and I exactly know what happens, then that's more beneficial because it is more transparent, right, in a way. Now, if I can do it for a large sum of money, then that is also beneficial to me. And this is maybe in a way where you can get a little bit more technical. If you want to do like a science fiction thing, where years of my life just like disappear and like transfer to someone else. So what? If I use 10 years of my life and I don't suffer throughout that process, it just disappears, and you are taking 10 years, giving it to someone else who's, dying from cancer, but is fantastically rich. That person gets 10 years. I get money, which helps me actualize. Helps me be happy, right? And that's fantastic. So the trade-off here is you taking on some kind of harm for some other kind of benefit, and you're going to show why that benefit is more important. Okay? So that's the basic kind of arguments you run from there. On op, it is about defending against bad choices. So you need to show why this not just could be a bad choice, most likely is always a bad choice, right? Because you talk about the unintended consequences. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. Excuse me. And it'll be very hard for you to back out of it, right? Especially if I can take 10 years of my life and sell it. What if I get a disease later? Then I can't buy this thing back, and then I've lost it, and then I regret, and I don't have my self-actualization. Slave contracts are not a good idea because it removes a lot of individual liberties and leads to people's exploitation. Okay, so you talk about why those things are really bad choices, and then you talk about exploitation. The other side is going to try to spin exploitation as a way for individuals who are already in a sucky situation to leap out of it and empower themselves. You say that no, these individuals are going to empower themselves limitedly, and it won't be sustainable. Very soon they'll fall back in there. But even if that is, it's a false kind of empowerment, right? It's like saying people should become prostitutes because you can get more money. You should sell your body to get money. It makes poor people commodities, right? They become objects that other people can buy and sell and use, and therefore reduces their worth. It doesn't increase their worth. It doesn't give them more. It makes them smaller. It makes them replaceable, reusable, disposable, and that's really bad. Okay, that's really demeaning. Sounds horrible, right? So that's the basic kind of trade-off here. On protection, is this empowering individuals, or is it leading to more harm? And second, does it benefit them, or does it harm them more, right? General trade. And I'm sure you can see this kind of trade-off in other debates. It's similar to the arguments you'd make in like a selling organ trading debate, right? To a large extent. Good. Second one, duels to the death. Now, this is a debate that actually was quite popular. It went around for a while in some tournaments, and I'm sure you could find some of these videos online, although it doesn't really happen now that much. But duels are, back in the day when two people had a conflict, they would settle it by fighting. shooting each other or fighting with a sword or doing something in order to settle their dispute, right? It means that sometimes one person died, sometimes both people died, sometimes people standing next to them died. But it was the most independent, individual way to settle contract disputes. You and I have a problem, let's settle it. It's also kind of how, you used to settle things in middle school, I guess. After school, you go to the back of the school and you have a punch out. So it's very kind of brutal. In one sense, very barbaric, very old and, uncivilized. In another sense, natural, human, raw, and pure, and quite resolute, because once that, at the end of the duel, contracts tend to be resolved for good. Although maybe your son or the next generation may take a grudge and I suppose try to resettle the duel, so maybe it doesn't necessarily get solved, which is an argument you can use in the debate. But again, the argument here, so in terms of, how you're going to approach a setup debate, it's all about them individual rights, okay, and freedoms to do this amazing, wonderful thing, which is settle the disputes among yourself, right? So how the government or whatever the regulations would be is just make sure that, again, that there is information so people know they have a chance to back out of the duel, right? And yeah, pretty much that's it, right? You go ahead and you do it. So again, the arguments are similar. There's individual rights, right? Freedom. I'm not harm. Well, in this sense, you are harming other people, but the other person has accepted the possibility of harm that's going to come from this, right? So it's like boxing. Again, I'm trying to find similarities, right? It's like extreme harms, extreme sports, or K1 pride fighting, where you get into a situation where the other person may hurt you, and you say that's okay, because I may also hurt the other person. So things are pretty even and balanced here, right? So that's the type of harm that you're talking about, and why that harm is acceptable. That's something that we are willing to live with, right? Then you can also talk about benefits, how it will resolve contracts, right? Individual responsibility, and how these are fantastic things and you want to allow societies to, have them, okay? On op, you could directly clash with the freedom idea, right? So you can talk about how there is, when challenged to a duel, it's very hard for you to say no. It's hard for you to resist, like being challenged for a fight. So it isn't really a free choice, right? On one hand, the person with more power, and this can also be, it can lead to an asymmetry argument, right? If I'm an expert shot, if I'm a big fighter kind of guy, right, then I'm going to challenge other people. That's going to be my default. And it's going to be very difficult for other people, especially if they don't want to lose face, if there's pride, if there's ego, all of these things involved, or if there's a culture of, machismo and stuff. It's going to be very hard for me to resist, and I'm going to be drawn into these duels, and I'm going to lose, right? So it's not balanced. It's not a free choice in that sense. The other side can kind of flip it and also say that it evens the playing field in some sense, because in the status quo, which is what the other side would use, you have all these lawsuits, you have technicality and stuff, which privileges those with more money, privileges those with more connections, right? So if I have lawyer friends, I'm more likely to have a lawsuit, a law case against you and sue you if I have more funds, more resources. If you're poor but a great shot, you're not going to be able to defend yourself against my litigation. Or will argue that you still have more options, you have more pro bono lawyers, you can lean on the government to back you up and so on and so forth, but you can't do that in the situation of a duel. So again, you can see how this argument will go back and forth on which side is freedom better regulated and yet better respected, and which side is freedom more even, right? And which side does exploitation happen more often? Okay, and that's going to be the argument here, right? In terms of the harm that it will cause, and why states cannot legislate this and cannot allow harm. And I think on op you can also run a kind of slippery slope, right? It allows individuals to take dispute resolutions into their own hands. It encourages violence as a form of solving problems, vigilante action. So if the other person doesn't completely agree to the duel, never agrees to the duel, then I don't get my justice. If this is viewed as justice, as a way of getting justice, and then I may take things into my own hands, right? So we can't. We need to make sure that the state is the only dispenser of violence. You can create a caveat for self-defense situations, but other than that, you must say that state should have a monopoly on this type of violence, because it's so asymmetrical, because then it can create these problems, because there'll be a slippery slope, because it changes the unique position of the state and manages stuff against society, and it's part of our social contract, and so on and so forth, right? On Gov, you say that this is a unique social contract between individuals. If both these individuals completely agree, you'll say that the government side is talking about like exceptions, but not exceptions, but not the real situation, not the one where you think is appropriate, right? So what if these two individuals completely agree, they're both well educated, they're both evenly matched, then will you have it, will you not have it? It's just like boxing, etc., right? So that's where the debate is. On Gov, you don't want to descend too much into like a free-for-all fight. This isn't really about gangs kind of taking things in their own hands and killing themselves, although that's what on op you say is what it will end up becoming, right? Or is the essence of what you represent. On Gov, you want to still show how duels can be, and as it used to be in the past, very open, very public, very regulated events, right? And that's what you support. So it's a kind of freedom and violence and barbarism, but within a very controlled, stoic environment. This is a distinction from and different from me running up to someone and stabbing them, right? It's like you and me agree to a knife fight to the death, and we plan and we discuss and we talk about it for weeks and we think about it, and then we sit down and then we have this knife fight. Of course, on op you say it doesn't always happen that way. Okay, so that's the second debate. Last but not least, something with slightly different tack. We're moving away from all this harm stuff and going back to a libertarian ideal. What all libertarians love to hate? Tax. Hate tax. So we're going to talk about tax. Very straightforward debates. The extreme part here is all forms. Okay, every single form of tax. So this is payroll tax, company tax, right? Sales tax, everything. Boom. Don't need any of these taxes. On government, you argue that tax is a form of oppression. I'll get into the model part a little bit, right? That how it limits individual liberty and freedom, right? Because individuals should have money to spend on their own. They should decide what they want to spend on and not have to fund the government, right? Funding government creates government. Even government has more funds, government becomes more powerful, and government becomes more oppressive. And it's hard for me to decide what exactly government does or doesn't, right? Voting only does so much. Now that government has so much power, they try to do things for everybody. They control the roads, they control the air, they control what you see on TV, they control how you can move, they control corporations, everything is controlled. I mean, governments have billions and billions in governments to control, and there's no way individuals can fight against government, right? Because they have so much power. You don't think that cooperation with other people is bad. You think that we should rely on communities. It's like small governments, right? So if like 100 people want to get together and form a cooperative, that's fine. They can all share, pool their resources, and become stronger, right? So little companies and stuff are fine. But when power gets too big, when you end up doing things that you don't want, then it becomes very, very dangerous, right? So you like the sense of kind of small anarchy-like states where individuals choose to give money for services. Okay, and this is how you make and this is the model. And this is how you make the distinction between tax. So on op, they say like that's what tax is, right? Tax is you paying money and getting something in return. But that paying and getting something in return isn't necessarily clearly defined. It's like you go to a restaurant, but you don't know really what you're going to eat, and you agree with the restaurant to pay some money, and then the restaurant will give you what they want to give you, right? That's roughly how it works. And you say like, but maybe I didn't want this, and then the restaurant says like, that's pretty much all we have. Sorry, you paid for it. If you don't want to eat it, you don't have to eat it, but you need to buy something else, right? So that's how libertarians kind of approach this. So instead, you say you pay for services, right? So if I want to use the postal service, if I want to drive, if I want to do anything that the government's going to provide, I will pay for those things. If I think defense is important, I will pay for those things. If the government wants to raise money for these things, they need to charge specific services that individuals should pay for. And if individuals don't pay for those services, they don't get it, right? So it's like your housing area and whether or not you want to pay for security or don't want to pay for security. If I don't want to pay for security, I don't get it. If I don't want to pay for insurance, I don't get it. If I don't want to pay for lunch, I don't get it. I don't need to be forced to pay for all of these things, okay? You can also argue that some form of small government can still exist from the money that it gains from all these services. The government treats itself like a business, and from other things the government provides, right? So the government controls and sells resources. For example, government has a pretty good investment in some things and it gets a return on investment from their investments. Fantastic. Government can fund these things and they can survive on their own. Okay? The trickiest thing you need to defend here is national defense. That's one thing that it's very hard to show how people, how it will function without tax. I think the workaround here is saying that they can make money from other services to fund defense. And if people want to like raise funds for it occasionally, they can. Okay? On op, talk about why this is obviously not going to be viable, why you need to have, the state needs to be functioning, right? So you talk about how, what we said earlier in the debate, how welfare states can be more empowering, right? Not less empowering. How tax isn't just about, or how tax is about helping everybody, right? Helping the majority. Okay? And why then you need to give some amount of tax. So on op, you don't need to talk about large types of tax. If you don't want to defend a welfare state, you don't need to defend a welfare state. But you need to talk about how having a larger role of government can build everybody, right? And this is where you get to the whole society is connected with each other. We're standing on the shoulders of other people, right? And therefore the state has a role in collecting everybody's money, and it's fair. You also talk about unintended consequences. You can't only start collecting for defense when you need it, and you can't only start collecting for a service when you want to use it, right? Because you don't know when you're going to get sick, and you don't know when you're going to get postal services. Again, it comes down to balance, okay? So, fantastic areas of debating. It'll be a great chance for you to discover the individual libertarian in you, or balance that against what the rest of society wants, does, or needs.